Welcome to the Trinity Forum. My name is BJ Owens. I'm the Dean of Trinity Cathedral in Cleveland, Ohio. I am excited about this conversation with Dr. Jeff Spiess. Jeff has written a really powerful book called Dying with Ease, a compassionate guide to making end-of-life decisions. Jeff has spent his medical career working with people facing illness, serious illness and death. He first worked as an oncologist and then as a hospice physician. He's lectured extensively and has been recognized as a leader in the field of end-of-life care. His own writing provides information and inspiration and challenges us all to honestly reflect on our own mortality in order to both die better and to live more fully. And here at Trinity, we know Jeff well. He is a member of the congregation. And so it's an incredible pleasure to read this book, but also to be able to have this rich conversation with Dr. Spiess. May I call you Jeff for the interview?
Please do.
Yes. About this. In the life of our faith and where that meets our life in the world, there are a few things more important than this in terms of how we talk about what's really going on in our lives, especially when we talk about the end of our lives, what that means to us as people of faith and for our whole families. So Jeff, welcome.
Thank you. It's just a delight, and I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Well, I have too, and I enjoyed reading this so much. And part of that for me, I think, comes from the work that I do, not only as a priest, but it really brought me back to I spent a year as a hospital chaplain at University of North Carolina. And I remember doing a lot of this work with families. And I feel like you've really shown a whole lot more of not only the process of what that looks like from the medical perspective, but this is a much deeper guide for anyone, and I think you'd be the first to say this, for anybody who is likely to encounter this in their life, which is most, if not all of us. Okay, it's all of us.
It's all of us, yeah.
It's all of us. That's the first thing we have to get past, is that this is something we all have to deal with. It's a really wonderful guide for helping us to we can't take out the fear or the anxiety of it. We certainly can't take away our mortality, but this does help to take away some of the noise so that we can begin to ask this question of how do we prepare ourselves, but how do we walk with our loved ones? How do we move into this sacred part of life with a sense of where, certainly for us as people of faith, where is God's presence in this? But how do we hold on to a sense of dignity and integrity in the midst of this? And so I guess my first question for you is, who were you envisioning this book for?
I'm envisioning it for anybody that wants to read it, of course. But I do think, one of the people that I interviewed in working on this is a hospital chaplain, and she said, "Jeff, you're writing this for yourself, don't you?" And I said, "Of course, no, I'm not, because I've learned things and I want to communicate." But I realized that, yes, the process of writing the book really informed what I wanted to say and taught me a great deal. So, yes, anybody that's going to die. And since the most common cause of death is being alive, so that's anybody. But
oh no, that's all of us.
That's also, well, let me do something with that, if that's okay. If that's okay, because what you introduced and the questions you asked at the beginning are the big print questions, but they're gigantic. And so let me start with that piece here. And I'm going to read 5 names. And since those who are Trinity parishioners may recognize these 5 names, because if you attended the streaming Eucharist, the Mass this morning on the November 15th, you heard these names: Bill Fuller, Nancy Rich, Dave Miano, Pam Turos, and Graham Owens. Now, why? Because they're having birthdays this week. And so, that tells you that you went through this. Mine says that a little infant boy was born to Colleen Louise Spiess and Gerald Allen Spiess on November 25th, 1954 at 12:35 a.m. at Detweiler Memorial Hospital, Wauseon, Ohio, attended by Dr. Francis E. Elliott. And you've all got one. Everybody's got one, and everybody will have another piece of paper that is going to join that piece of paper at some point. Right. You remember when you were a kid and your birthday was so special, you thought everybody that looked at you would know that there was something special about you that day. You were celebrating being born. Right. And nowadays, you tell your birthday all the time. You go to the hospital to see the doctor, they ask you what your birthday is. They ask you what your birthday is. They ask you what your address is. Are they ever going to send you a card? No, even though they have all the vital information right there. Until each of us recognizes that we are mortal, and that if you look at this body, these hands, these eyes, those feet, this brain, it'll be not some hypothetical person, but the person with these hands, right, these eyes, those feet, and this brain will not exist in a way that we know it. And it's you will go through this. Dying is probably the most important thing we do as humans outside of being born. And we can't fix that. We can't fix the fact that we are going to die, but we can affect, usually, the way we live leading up to that. And that's kind of where I saw so much suffering that hurt me, because people seem to be doing it poorly. And it's not that they were doing a bad job given what they had, but they didn't start early enough, and nobody'd been honest with them and told them that it was going to happen and it needed to get ready. Yeah.
What I would always think of when I go back to a lot of those situations, and in some ways it's easier to comment on being a hospital chaplain where I have some distance from the families, because once I became a pastor of a church, as a pastor, I become an extension of their family, and I'm now complicit in how this is working or not working. So it's easy, and I can say I recognize all these stories in a lot of those, if I can say, good deaths and not so good deaths. And understanding the first reality is this is going to happen to all of us, but that how we, to the extent that we can control what happens in those final days and hours, has a lot to say about the lives that we live leading up to it. And that threads back to what is the great pandemic question right now? For me, it's how are we going to live the rest of our lives in any number of places, and preparing for our death. And God willing, that's a long time down the road, is a part of living our lives. Now, one of the passages, there's so many that I would want to share with you or bring back to you, but one which I think lifts this up well is as you're talking about it later in the chapter in the book, where you talk about envisioning your own death, which is an exercise and a discipline that is actually a part of wise and mature living. And you quote the Bhagavad Gita, but Saint Benedict says it too: keep death before you daily.
Right.
And we might ask, why does he ask that? But here we are on page 148. In the is death our friend or is death an enemy? In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that because death stirs people to seek answers. And I'm going to stop that because first, as I was typing this, I was dictating it onto my iPad, and which spell checked to say, instead of death stirs people, it said, because death stars people. Even the iPad is afraid of talking about death. The first thing we have to know is our culture takes, oh, don't talk about that nasty old word, and let's come on back. And but really, this is something really powerful, that because death stirs people to seek answers to important spiritual questions, it becomes the greatest servant of humanity rather than its most feared enemy. And that is not to sugarcoat or Pollyannize or make saccharine and and painless something that is devastating and difficult, but rather to say that it's going to frame our life whether we like it or not. The question is, what does it mean for how we live?
Right. Absolutely. And you're right. I chose the Bhagavad Gita quote because I'm trying to be, because I like the Bhagavad Gita. It speaks to me. It's a wonderful text. But because again, I'm trying to make sure that I hear voices from multiple traditions. But you're right. The monastic traditions put this very strongly. Yes, Saint Benedict clearly, and Saint Francis talked about sister death, and the dying was a friend. And it is true, being present with it, knowing that life is short makes it more precious. Knowing that life is will end can make it more precious. And I find myself kind of giving that little line to myself when I'm what should I say, wasting time, play another game on the computer, or watch something idiotic on television. And those are healthy things that's okay.
Right.
That's okay. But time is what we've got. Time is the stuff of our lives. Yes, that's absolutely right.
Well, let me start in a different place, and we can come back to right where we were. One of the reasons why I enjoyed this as much as I did, you write as a doctor, you write as a hospice physician, you write as someone coming from a faith and wisdom tradition, but one who honors the many different ways that we approach this. I was struck by how honest you were. And also very open. How do you, as a writer and as a doctor, write about death and maintain integrity doing it?
Oh, wow. Well, I actually don't see that as a problem, because it's just honest. Yes, I do think that in Western societies, and in the U.S. in particular, we medicalize dying.
Right.
But really until not even 100 years ago, because penicillin was Alexander Fleming found his penicillium mold in 1929, and that's really what I date the start of kind of miracle medicine, as you will. The dying was just part of caring for the patient, and because whether it's the family doc, going to, So one of the images that I come back to, and it's probably because I'm a boomer, and so in Gone with the Wind, Melanie Hamilton Wilkes's dying scene, and I'm going to go at this a little differently, but the doctor was there. Dr. Wilkes is in Dr. Wilkes? No, Dr. somebody, whoever he is in the room with his long frock coat and immaculate things, which would really be realistic.
Right.
But he's there and he's managing the dying. He's allowing people in, and so I don't think that it's disingenuous at all. I think that docs are starting to figure it out, but docs are internal optimists, and that's fine. When I have my heart attack, I want the cardiologist to be cocksure and
Right.
know what he's doing and be able to work miracles. I got that. But I also know that it's really important to recognize what is that death is not an enemy. It
Right.
might be it might be what you're trying to prolong, or I'm sorry, delay would be a better
Right.
term as a doc, but it's not something that you can prevent. And
Right.
I just think that's honest. Yes.
Well, I think that the honest, you, in all things, as we approach death, you really can't gild the lily that much. You have to approach it honestly, and you have to be willing to say what you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really part of the gift of this book. Um, and I also, so I was a chaplain about 18 years ago,
Okay.
and I can see the progression today. Then it was even, palliative care was emerging a bit more as something that we can talk about. I worked in pediatrics mostly, where they're very comfortable with a more integrative approach.
Yes. Yes.
But I can see how many years it takes for that to really have an impact on the medical establishment. And I also have I have a deep appreciation for doctors, nurses, therapists whose training is very, very specific, and the body is an incredibly complex system, and it takes a lot of skill to manage that. But you also talk about, now let's talk about spiritual care at the end of life, when you now have a lot less time and a whole lot more questions,
Right.
which can result in a spiritual crisis, which needs a lot more than someone to just show up next to your bed and say a quick prayer.
Yeah.
And that care for the dying, care for the whole family, that is a whole multi-layered need as well. And we can't just expect the oncologist to do that too, which is one of the gifts of the hospice movement and the tradition that I think is also spilling over, we can hope, into other areas of care.
Yeah.
But to realize that hospice is something, it's a vehicle with a capacity to deal with the whole person at the exact moment that whole person needs help. Because one of the great insights that you talk about is caring for someone in the final days and weeks of their life. The main problem is not the disease, not problem. The main reality to deal with is not the disease. The main reality to deal with is the fact that that person is dying.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different level of priority.
It is. And I think medicine in general is recognizing that, and that's why hospice and palliative medicine are now a recognized specialty. So my job as a hospice physician, I think, was mainly to allow the rest of the work to happen. And maybe to give permission for the rest of the work to happen. For example, one of the questions that I asked often when I was managing the inpatient hospice unit especially when the patient themselves was not going to be able to participate much in the conversation, but I'm sitting around with family members. And one of the questions that I asked often is, so tell me about mom. And the sometimes often people would kind of look quizzically like, what are you talking about? Don't you have her records? You didn't know, that she had, breast cancer and it spread here. I said, no, that's not what I'm asking. Tell me about your mom.
Right.
And that gave people permission to start thinking in a different way and recognizing that there are different questions that are important here.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times that was a terribly cathartic event for families, but it's also, to be real honest, for a time-strapped doc, it was also an efficiency measure, because that's really what I wanted to know. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to know about the patient and their goals and what was important to them. And this then set the stage for other people when they came in to realize, yeah, this is what it's about. It's about us as persons here.
Mm-hmm.
I got asked a great question in an interview last week, and I hadn't thought about it. When I got asked, why does our society treat death as a medical or legal event when it's really a spiritual event? And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, that is a tremendous question, because yes, I had to do the doctor stuff, and yes, the legal stuff, I had to say that at 12:42 this person was a living human being, and at 12:44 this person was a corpse because they died at 12:43.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that doesn't say what happened. What happened is that a human being, a child of God, transitioned into whatever, it happens next.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that it's important because there's just another observation I made, is that watching families around someone who is really very near their death, and it's really pretty obvious that it's not going to be very long at all. The families tend to be talking to each other and about the person that's dying. But as soon as they die, they're talking to the deceased,
Hmm.
that theoretically is no longer there, but is now the most important person in the room, and it perhaps has a stronger presence than they had before. It's those kinds of mysteries that just amaze me in this work, and why um, I just tried to pay attention and learn from them.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can say. Yes.
What can you say about what it means to think ahead? Or
Okay.
it's not simply a matter of planning. That's why I use the phrase, you take a lot of the noise out of the dying process, but you can't take a lot of things out of it. Um, but by thinking about things, practical things like advanced directives, durable power of attorney, um, I've always, to me, it's important to talk to the people who you talk to your family about your faith. What do you believe is going on
Mm-hmm.
in death? Talk about your desires. What in terms of end of life care. Talk about finances. Talk about all the things that the emotional health of your family.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Thinking about, you don't have to be dying to have these questions, but the reality of our deaths, which will happen at some point, is an occasion for us to enrich our lives by having some very real conversations with the people that we love now, and to think about it. So what would you recommend to people as they're beginning to say, all right, how do I think about this?
Yes, well, I would have them say, do what BJ just said, because I think you gave the sermon. But you're right. Yes, do the legal stuff. think about your stuff, do your estate planning, your will, and things like that. That's good. Occasionally I've had patients that says, I didn't make a will because I know I'm not going to be here and I'm going to love watching the fight. And so that's good. Okay, you want to go there, but that's fine. Not very healthy, not very
Yeah.
comfortable. But but um,
Don't say that with your priest in the room, because she or he might have a few follow-up
yeah,
questions on that.
yeah, there's a lot of questions about that. But no, with regard to thinking ahead, and I like that because I've often used the word planning, and thinking ahead is a good is probably a better term. I like that. Um, yes, the documents help. Living will and your healthcare power of attorney, those are important. But the thing that stresses to me is that I stress over and over is the conversation. If you name someone your healthcare power of attorney, their job when you can no longer speak for yourself is to speak for you and to do what you would want, not what they would want, not what feels comfortable to them, but what you would want. And if that's their job, then you need to have that conversation with them so they know what that is. The talking through things. There used to be for a few years there was a bit of a movement in the end of life world to make Thanksgiving the conversation day because families tended to be present around the table, and all the kids were down at the kids table, so the adults were all sitting by themselves, and you could have those conversations. I don't think it happened. I think football kind of changed that too. And, we just don't have those conversations. But that is the point. That is the point is planning ahead. Um, there's,
If I could just jump in really quickly,
yeah,
one thing that I've often observed is in that moment around the bedside, or even if you think more broadly just about the time leading up, that getting to what you write a lot about in terms of how we die as a reflection of how we live, that moment can be a moment where the seeds that we sow throughout life, through these conversations, through how we live our lives, can bear some really beautiful fruit.
right.
They can also be moments where the disintegration points of disintegration in our lives come under an especially acute stress.
Right.
And we can't control so many variables, but that's just a pattern that I've observed throughout life. And I feel like our work as pastors, as parents, as loved ones, is not to be saying like let's live our lives a certain way because we're going to want to think about it later down the road, but rather this is partly we can see what the fruit that it bears, and that the positive thing is we're living our lives now. How do we plant those seeds, given that we want to lead meaningful, integrated lives, and this helps us to have some, have the rubber meet the road a bit. I interrupted you. Keep going. You're talking.
No,
about...
that's okay. I'm sorry. But let me go at this for a couple different ways. One is the dying taught me over and over and over again that and some of them articulated it. Maybe I said this earlier, or maybe it was in the interview I had yesterday. Sorry, that's sorry, but
that's okay.
that learning to die was teaching them how to live. And that's, I think, exactly what you're talking about, because what becomes important becomes obvious, and it clarifies things. And you're right. Sometimes that time is just horrible for families. Most families seem to be able to hold it together for a short time,
Right.
but if you kind of are hanging on, then the seams start ripping, and that's a problem. But the hospice social workers just say, Jeff, the only dysfunctional family is the one that only has one person in it. So that's just the way it is.
Wait, do you mean the only functional family?
The only functional family. You're right.
Right.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I even got the quote wrong.
Right. And that's the other thing is let's not hold ourselves to an unrealistic standard. Right. So like I am going to, when it's time, I'm going to be surrounded by all my loved ones. They're not going to be mad. I'm going to be free of pain. I'm going to look great. You know, there's going to be a halo, and I'm just going to be turned to everybody and say, I'm so proud of you all. Yes, and then, yes. You know,
it's a wonderful image, and Hollywood has helped. But
right.
But you're right. But you may get parts of that. And you can get parts of that.
It comes out crumbly.
Yeah, it does come. Crumbly is a good word. So one piece of planning that is I come back to over and over and over and over again, or one piece of looking ahead, I'm sorry, is the work of dying.
Right.
And what one person whose early work, or even what he's doing now, I respect, although he's now more into hallucinogenics, but Dr. Ira Byock, who wrote a book in the 90s called Dying Well. And he went through various stories of patients that he had cared for, and started with the story of his father. But Ira identified 5 tasks of the dying person, and he put them in terms of statements that the dying person should say in order to complete their lives. And it's an oversimplification. So the 5 statements that Dr. Byock said were the tasks of the dying were to say, I forgive you, forgive me, I love you, thank you, and goodbye.
Yeah.
Now, whenever I say those, and I say them often, I think of the people, sometimes a different person each time, somebody that I need to say that to, or it would be better if I said that to. And I'm sure, and to know that if I'm now down to the last week of my life, and I really wish I would have completed that kind of work, I probably don't have time, and I probably don't have energy to do it. But the most important thing is not to do it earlier, before you're, as in your dying process, but why wait till you're dying? Those are the tasks of being an integrated and authentic person in relationship with others. And healing those relationships is great when it happens 2 days before somebody dies, and it causes lots of tears and everybody feels good about it. But if you heal that relationship 20 years before you die, you've got 20 years of less distress in your life. And I think that's one of the lessons that the dying do teach us.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's a lesson that serves us well before that we reach that moment in our lives. You know, I'll give you a trade secret, which is pastors are taught that if we don't do our work, we can't serve others very well, our own interior work. And there is a good chance that most of us will care for a lot of dying people before it is our time. Despite the fact that within our culture, yes, we have a medical approach to dying, and we stay away from it. We look away from it. But the reality is we will see it, and we will be caring for people. And this is where, and I appreciate you saying it, to do our own death work and to ask these questions and to consider our own limits and mortality, and consider the fact that we will not be here forever, and to ask those questions actually helps us to care for other people who are dying.
I think that's brilliant and a gigantic point. And I believe, and I wish that were that advice that priests are taught and other clergy members are taught was what docs were taught, that that it's important to do your own stuff. You are not a Superman going in to heal disease. You are a person encountering another person who is suffering. I really there is a growing trend in medicine, but a lot of it is within the hospice and palliative care community. We're all, learning that to be good docs for the dying, we have to be good docs for ourselves. We have to treat ourselves
Yeah.
the same way and recognize our own mortality. And to be honest, I think that's one reason physicians have tended to sugarcoat. The reason is always, well, I don't want to scare them. Well,
Right.
I really think that the reason you don't want to scare them is because I don't want to scare myself, because
Yeah.
I'm in this same boat. And if I recognize that I, as a physician, am mortal and am going to die and I'm going to be in this situation, how would I want someone to communicate with me? And maybe I'll communicate with them that way, because people can handle it. People can handle bad news as long as you deliver it well. They don't like it much, and they may
Right.
scream and cry and wail or go silent, but they make better decisions and make better choices and live better lives when they know what reality is. Yeah,
I think people know at some instinctive level when
absolutely,
they're not getting the whole story. And I think
absolutely.
that makes it that much more painful
Yeah,
when you can't actually name and talk about what's going on.
right.
Um, Now, there were a number of times throughout your book where I recalled two very distinct yet similar moments in my life. And they are moments that most of us can recognize, at least one of them. And that is when my grandmother died, and she spent her last week and a half in an inpatient hospice facility. You have a different term for it, but it was beautiful, and it was a really wonderful experience for my whole family. And what I remember noticing was, and having spent plenty of time in hospitals, visiting, and now you should know, I also, my dad's a physician, and so we grew up. Back in the day where you could do this, he would just take us with him on rounds, and
Yeah.
so we would just go to hospitals on Saturday morning, and that was just normal life. Um, the but what was so distinct about the hospice experience for my grandmother was there was this sense of we were waiting for something, and it was a pacing that we could not control, and it was sacred,
Mhm.
and time took on a very different kind of sense.
Mhm.
And I realized just how much that reminded me of when my children were born.
Oh, yeah.
That that same sense of something really sacramental was happening.
Mhm. I
So sorry, excuse me.
no, no,
It's hard not to get that way when you think about that, and just the really beautiful similarity between the two.
yeah, I think that's really true. I think that's really true. And the analogy works, and um, we all, none of us know what being born feels like, but we all went through it, but we don't remember. I don't remember what that feels like. Um, I don't know what dying will feel like, but I'll get through it. It'll be okay. Um, and I agree. I think these are holy moments. I really do. Um, I have a friend who was a hospice social worker for years, and then now is an independent counselor and a avowed atheist, but talked about the essential humanity of the process that was happening at the bedside, and that this was whatever, even for someone who would never posit the idea of any divine presence at all than just a body stopping, a heart stopping, and things like that. And part of that is relationship, and part of the relationships and the love and the things that are shared. The other little birth and dying piece that I would mention is, if you go from the medical standpoint, when I was born in 1954, and that was back when moms were either drugged or just, it was very much a medical procedure. It was all about the hospital and the doctor and everything like that. It was very medicalized. But it was moms that then figured out, we need to learn a better way to give birth, and that's why there are now birthing centers and midwives and doulas and people that make birthing a human experience, not a medical procedure. And the same thing has happened in dying. It just hasn't caught on as well. Well, I think it has caught on. You have 9 months to plan for a birth. If people had 9 months to plan for a dying, they might do better at it. That's probably true. Yeah.
And it's really just how we allocate the time we have, because it's
right.
there.
That's right. That's right. It's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Well, you write so. If I could conclude with a question about faith, since we're all part of the same faith tradition here at Trinity. You write about how our faith can support us, but you also write about there are limits there too. And that the more dogmatic we approach, that can actually cause more suffering than open doors. And I love our tradition, and I think that if we really dig deeply into what we're being taught, we find an expansiveness and a mystery that will help us. But I also wonder for you, what about what we celebrate in our own faith helps you to think about dying with ease? What stories or practices would you commend as something that helps us think about this?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And one of the things that I do think that community helps. I think that worshiping together, taking the sacraments as a body, because there is a mutual support there that is helpful. One of the other pieces that I would strongly recommend is what you said, is the digging deeper, because if you look at for the Trinity parishioners, there's going to be an adult formation class with three lectures, video lectures, and I've actually already recorded them. And the third is on religion and spirituality. So I went through, kind of scanning through the Book of Common Prayer, looking for things to add. There wasn't much. I mean, there are some prayers for the dead and and prayers for the sick and things like that, but it's not there much. If you look at the creeds and things, there's not much about us dying, except for resurrection. That doesn't help much, but there's a tremendous amount as one goes deep. I would commend people to the Psalms or to the Book of Ecclesiastes, that where people are asking really hard questions about what's this all about, and just see what's there. There are many writers, and find one you like. The mystics tend to be great. The contemplatives tend to be great.
Yeah.
Because as spend time with yourself, figuring out whether that's doing the daily office or doing journaling or doing meditation, to just learn yourself and learn who you are, and your relationship with the cosmos, and you'll find the relationship. Sometimes you got to step outside the tradition to find the answer you want. It's okay. What's been that I've loved is, as I've done that and read more and more, I found that no, our tradition says that too. I might say it in a different way. It's there. It's there. It's there. Yes, and be open. Be open. If if so if I'm sitting in church and I hear you say something in the from the pulpit, I think, oh, that's crap. And I don't say that often, but
Happens to the best of us.
it happens. It happens. I say things I say, and I think, what did I just say? But the answer is, well, go think about that a little bit. Be with that. It's okay. Just to be
I just
open.
want to note that the fact that you froze up after saying what the minister said is crap is purely coincidence, and in no way me playing with the button.
Well, now, yes, well, you froze for me, so I didn't even hear what you said, but that's okay.
Well, we're not supposed to be laughing when we're talking about death, but there it just happened. But because this is life. This is life, and part of taking. We trust God to take away some of the sting of death, but by taking away the mystery and the layers and the baggage we mount onto it, that is not helping us to die a better death or to live a better life, is a healthy. I would think it's a healthy process, and I come back to your really wonderful framing that how we think about death and how we die is a reflection of how we live our lives. And the gift of this, and your book does this wonderfully well, is to help us to reflect on the life that we're living today, and to really deepen that, and so that it leads to us to a deeper relationship with our loved ones, a deeper relationship with ourselves and to live with integrity, and a deeper, more fruitful relationship with God that's rooted in honesty and joy and all the things that make life. Yeah. So, Jeff, I'm so glad you could take some time with us. I'm really looking forward to those videos that you've created. We're going to be sharing them around Advent, which is actually a great time to be looking at this as well. But thanks for your work and for your support and for being a part of the conversation.
Thank you, and I'm happy to be part of this conversation. And I'll also say I'm happy to be part of this congregation.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay.
Great. I want to thank all of you for joining the Trinity Forum. This really is a fantastic book, Dying with Ease, a compassionate guide for making wiser end-of-life decisions. It is a guide to decision making, but it really is also, I was joking with Jeff, but I wasn't joking at all. It's a work of theology. Because it has us looked at our relationship with God and our neighbor and all our loved ones, and to really draw back from, we look at how we die, and that teaches us something about how we live. So I invite, this may lead conversations, and if you want to come talk to me or to Adrian or to any member of our leadership, sometimes that's a part of this process as well. So I want to thank you for joining us. It's a blessing to have this conversation, and I look forward to continued conversations as we go forward.